What's up, everyone? Here for another episode of Locked On Bucks. On yesterday's show, which, by the way, you should go and check out, I talked about the history of the Bucks in the draft. So on today's show, Justin's here. So what position, if the Bucks use their first-round pick, what position should they be looking at? Not necessarily names, but when you look at where the roster's at, where you project it may be moving forward, what position should they be drafting for? And then a second question we have to ask, how was John Horst year? The former executive of the year. Did he have a good year this year? We're going to get into that as well. So let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on the show Monday to Friday, and also follow my work over at ESPN. And alongside me is, from the Bucks Radio Network, is Justin Garcia, as I try and spit that out properly. But Justin's here, and we thank you for listening to the Locked On Bucks or watching Locked On Bucks and making it your first listen or watch of every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. And before we get started, Justin, a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to do a mailbag. We haven't done a mailbag, honestly. Did we do a mid-season mailbag? I can't really remember. But anyway, every time we do the mailbags, I would say actually the off-season mailbags are the craziest because people have theories, they have thoughts, they have ideas of what the Bucks should do. So get your questions through either on YouTube, in the YouTube's comments section. And if you haven't been to YouTube, maybe that's the perfect time. Jump on, throw a question in the mailbag, hit subscribe while you're there, and everyone will be happy. You can get me on Twitter at Kane Pittman, or Frank, who will be back with us very shortly, is manning the Gmail account, lockedonbucks@gmail.com. So get your questions through there. We'll just continue to roll through them. I'm betting we're going to have enough questions to keep us going for a long while, Justin, because off-season content. This is when people go wild. This is what people love. We prefer if the Bucks were still playing basketball right now. We were preparing for the NBA Finals, but instead, people can come up with their crazy, radical ideas, which is the fun part of the off-season.
Yeah. First of all, how much of the Game 7 did you watch? Did you watch all of it between the Heat and the Celtics?
Yeah, there was a few moments where I dozed off. I was struggling to keep myself awake. It's been a long 7-game series. I will admit, and before I trash this series that I just thought was incredibly boring, I will say this: if you weren't a Bucks fan, I'm imagining that the Bucks Celtics series at times was a pretty tough watch as well. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why or what the reason is or why it's happened this way, but it does feel like there's been some particularly brutal playoff basketball, which is very unusual. I'm usually locked in 100%.
It's been pretty bad, and I agree. The Bucks Celtics went 7 games. It wasn't a compelling series, really. I mean, it had some basically blowouts. I mean, the Celtics outplayed the Bucks. It's easy to see why with no Middleton, but it went 7 games. It wasn't as good as going 7 games would make it seem, and that's been the issue with this playoffs. Is overall it's been bad. I wanted to stay engaged with the playoffs, but when you saw as soon as the Bucks were eliminated, and shortly before that too, looking at the Eastern Conference and saying, with no Chris, if we don't come out of this, the 3 teams left in the East are the Heat, the Sixers, and the Celtics. Maybe the 3 fan bases Bucks fans hate the most. You already knew, like, oh boy. And that series too, I found myself watching parts of Game 7. I had it on my iPad because it was double or nothing last night, so that was taking most of the attention. But, man, it was just bad. And you were just like, just get this series over with already. And I didn't know, quite frankly, who to root for. On one hand, you wanted to see the Celtics lose because you were bitter. On the other, you thought, well, we gave you something. With no Chris Middleton, you beat Kevin Durant in the first round. You beat us as the champions in the second round. Do something with this. And if they wouldn't have won that Game 7, that is one of the all-time choke jobs because they are better than the Heat and especially better than the banged-up version of the Heat. So on one hand, I think you look at it and you say, all right, well, at least we lost for something, that the Celtics are still playing for a title, so go finish that off.
Yeah, and our old friend PJ Tucker only played 17 minutes. He was pretty banged up by the end of that series, no doubt about that. So, yeah, it would have been interesting to see how Miami would have moved on to the next series. I already spoke last week when we chatted. I don't really care. I mean, everyone saw at this point of the season, there's no doubt, but it does feel like the Warriors are in better shape moving into this next round now. And it was one of the series that I think I've always enjoyed Bucks Warriors games over the years, and maybe because the Bucks a lot of the times have played pretty good basketball, even when the Bucks weren't that good. But it is a shame. It would be fun to see. Maybe some fans will say, "Gee, I don't know if I want this 3-point shooting team that's going to shoot a million threes against the Bucks." I don't know, but it would have been fun if we could have got Steph, Giannis. So I'm not suggesting that Steph is slowing down. It seems like he's still playing a high level of basketball. You would believe that Klay Thompson would be better for having this sort of half season under his belt next year. But yeah, with the local guys they have on the Warriors as well, I think it would be fun if we could somehow get that series down the line.
I mean, we never Super Bowl wise, we did get in the playoffs, but we've never had Brady and Rodgers in the Super Bowl. It's kind of like the Giannis and Steph thing. We did have Steph and LeBron, but I mean, we said time and time again too that this defense, the 3-point shooting scares you, but this defense is constructed to playing against a team that has one non-shooter on the floor, and that would be Draymond Green. So I think the Bucks would match up better. It's still not ideal, but I think they'd match up better with the Warriors. I think the Celtics are going to win. I think the Celtics are going to win in 6. I thought they were going to take care of the Heat rather easily, but as we've seen with the Celtics and the parallels to the Bucks last year, they just refuse to make anything easy here in this postseason run. So we'll see how the finals goes.
Interesting. I think the Warriors will win easily, so we might be on the other side of the fence there. And you just reminded me of something. We've also never seen Giannis and LeBron, and that's perhaps a little more interesting. I mean, obviously now he's out in the West, but he was in the East there for a while, and I guess there was some opportunities that the Bucks could have just got swept early days in Giannis's career, but they didn't quite ever come across each other. And Giannis has always been someone that's elevated when playing against LeBron. So I think, again, it feels like we're probably running out of opportunities for okay, let's just say out of all the combinations for next season, I don't think Bucks Lakers would be high on my list of teams that would be better.
I mean, think about the storylines. Darvin Ham versus Bud, Giannis versus LeBron. Depends on what they can get for Russell Westbrook there. The other, and boy, this is really taking a U-turn and veered off to what we plan on discussing, but it's also just so fascinating that it seems like the givens for the Bucks are Celtics, Heat, or Raptors. You're going to face one, if not two of those teams in the playoffs every single year. And the 76ers and Giannis and Joel Embiid is still the one thing that has avoided them, that those two teams and those two guys and Giannis and Embiid have yet to face each other in the postseason.
That's why I think the Celtics are still the Bucks' biggest rivals.
I agree.
Because now they've played each other 3 times in the playoffs. 2 of those series went to 7 games. So 3 times they've played each other in a 5-season stretch. I think it is 3 out of 5 years. Yeah. And obviously Toronto were in there a little bit as well with a couple of series. The Bucks weren't able to get a win there. But yeah, it doesn't feel like the Celtics are going away. It doesn't feel like the Bucks are going away either. So it wouldn't surprise you if those 2 teams played each other again. Let's talk about what position, if the Bucks do use pick 24, what position they could potentially need. And if they do have a rookie on the floor, it'll be interesting next year when the NBA season rolls around and you want to use a daily fantasy option for the NBA that perhaps you haven't heard of. You should be using Prize Picks because Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know you will too. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players and then over and under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. Yes, use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play there as well. So, maybe it is points scored you want to use, or maybe it's rebounds, or maybe it's steals. There are a bunch of players in this next series, pretty even teams, a bunch of contributors on each team for the NBA Finals, whether it's the Warriors or Celtics. So check out Prize Picks and all the props there. And it's not just NBA. There's college basketball, obviously, when that rolls around. Same with college football, the NFL, MLB right now if you're a Brewers fan and want to get involved. So for a limited time, we have an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all our users. Users get $50 free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA for $50 free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. That is Prize Picks Daily Fantasy made easy. Check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. And I've said it before, but we are going to have a few draft experts on this podcast that can certainly inform you far better than I can with all the prospects that are coming through, which is the reason why we haven't exactly gone into individual prospects just yet, because it would be a waste of time if I started talking them. But we do have a bunch of our listeners that are talking about it in the YouTube comments. But check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, and they will have you covered. But if the Bucks are to take pick 24, Justin, and I went through this on yesterday's podcast. If you didn't listen to it, you can go back. I went through a bunch of different things, just some Giannis love, just some general Giannis love as well, which we like to do from time to time. But the last 5 first-round picks the Bucks have taken, Justin: Jabari Parker out of the league, Rashad Vaughn out of the league, Thon Maker out of the league, DJ Wilson out of the league, Dante DiVincenzo still in the league, but no longer with the Bucks. So that's the last 5 that they've taken. They haven't taken a first-round pick since 2018, or they haven't had one on their roster anyway. That's for sure. But they may do it this year. And as I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, the problem for the Bucks right now is because of all those failed first-round draft picks that they've had, they are in a position where if you're trying to contend, and yes, we understand the salary situations with this team, but in an ideal scenario, you would be drafting a player that could come in and contribute. But that's just really hard when you've got a veteran team that is trying to compete for a top 2, top 3 seed. There aren't a lot of developmental minutes out there unless guys can really prove it straight away, which is going to be tough, particularly at that pick 24.
Yeah, it's especially hard for basically every team, but it seems like Miami, Toronto, Denver, the teams that could really find value and get that, especially later in the draft. And that's been always kind of the thing we've joked about too, is the Bucks have always been much better in the second round. Certainly that was years ago where it was much, much better with Malcolm Brogdon, the centerpiece there, but they've done much better in the second round than they have in the first round. But it's a good point that I know I've talked about it before too. On the one hand, you would look at the roster and say, sooner or later, you need a young guy that's going to contribute and that's going to be cheap. So on that hand, you would kind of say, well, I kind of think they're going to look to take a pick that they keep here at 24. But then the other part of that is what you just mentioned, in that, well, they're going to do something. And, if you, as we just said at the top of this show, if you watch the Eastern Conference Finals, it is very hard not to point to Chris Middleton and say, if he's healthy, we feel like we're playing for the championship once again, and we get through Boston, and we get through Miami in the conference finals. So we need another guy that can step in and contribute now. The way to do that, you would think, would be by packaging that pick after the draft, but packaging that pick with, I think the obvious names that get kicked around are George Hill and Grayson Allen. But that's the other interesting part about this upcoming offseason is the Bucks have 6 guys that are rostered. I think the number is technically 11, but 2 of those are Luka Vildoza and Rajon Tucker. The other 3, Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis, and Thanasis, all have early terminations that I would expect all of them to exercise there. So it's 6 guys that you have rostered. You're already into the tax, and you're basically going to have to round this out with veterans minimum. So that's another thing to consider with that first-round pick and what the Bucks do with that. And the other tricky part is, we mentioned 6. I don't know that I could give you a number right now and say I'm confident they have this many players that are guaranteed to be on the roster opening day. I think it's basically 4 at this point is what you would say, with Giannis, Drew, Chris, and Brook Lopez.
All right, so I said I'm not going to mention any names, but just as I do, start some, let's say, minor research. Again, I'm too late in the game to be trying to act like I'm some sort of draft expert here. But one name stands out to me. We've spoken for quite a while about the possibility and just the pure fantasy, really, of Nikola Jokic playing with Giannis. What about Nikola Jovic? Or Jovic? It might be Jovic. It could be Jovic. But Nikola Jovic. By the way, this guy's like 6'11", also from Serbia. He is only 18 years old, actually about to turn 19. Apparently, he can pass a little bit. Maybe this is the best way for the Bucks to pair Nikola and Giannis. So maybe that's the path they'll go down. But would you say what position? Let's ask that question. Given that there is obviously a lot of uncertainty, but let's just go ahead and assume that Bobby returns, Pat returns. So you have, the main core of your rotation there. Let's say Javon Carter returns as well. Grayson Allen and George Hill are both there. So basically the full rotation. Where are you looking, keeping in mind the age profile of the team? I guess you do have to kind of look to the future a little bit, even though I've just said that in an ideal world, you've got someone that contributes straight away. But where are you looking?
Yeah. Well, and by the way, Nikola Jovic seems like if 2K didn't have a licensing deal with the NBA, and that's who the Denver center would be. I mean, here's the other tough part for the Bucks is the two areas that you would look at and say we really need help here are the two areas where 29 other teams are saying we really need help here. And I think really what you saw in the playoffs is what the Bucks need more of. When they're healthy, they have enough of it. You could still always use more, but you need more perimeter scoring and shot creators there. So whether that's a 2-guard, a small forward, whatever it is, you need perimeter scoring. And you just need more of the PJ Tucker, Grant Williams mold of players. EJ Liddell is who everybody has kind of clung to here in the draft, but it seems like his stock is rising in the comparisons he's gotten to those two guys. He's probably going to jump up the draft board. So you need either some perimeter scoring and a shot creator, or somebody that is versatile enough to play in the front court and to basically defend 3 positions, or at least 2 very effectively, and one that you can fill in on in the front court spots there. So those are the 2 biggest needs. But again, that's basically what the rest of the league, maybe Boston is the only team looking around saying, we feel pretty good here, but the rest of the league is saying, yeah, we could use that too.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other point to note for sure is just the size of guards in the NBA at the moment, and the way that they're coming through. And even if you look at the last few years, and obviously Luka's massive and he's a guard, and Ben Simmons is massive at playing at the guard spot, and Josh Giddey and LaMelo Ball, these guys are all big. So the days of drafting 6'2", 6'3" guard, of course it's still going to happen. It's not going to be completely wiped away from the league, but it does tell you that, as you point to, versatility is more important than everything. And I would agree. Again, we'll get into names over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have someone that can tell us the guys that kind of fit these positions. But, I would generally disagree with the idea, and I've seen a little bit of it on Bucks Twitter just as I sort of read through how everyone's feeling moving forward. If the Bucks do take a rookie, I would probably think that the chances of them drafting a bigger guy or a center seems pretty low. Again, Frank always says it. Most of the time you draft rookies, they're not very good in their rookie season. Well, but especially with big guys. Yeah, especially big guys, even though you would be playing alongside Giannis. So even though, there are a bunch of talented big guys that are around that range that might go, anywhere in the 15 to 30 range. It always depends, I guess, based on what teams need. It would seem, if the Bucks were to draft, if they really liked a guy and said, look, we think this could potentially be a big man for the future beyond Brook Lopez, then maybe they would go down that path. But they are certainly on a timeline as a franchise where they're in a tough spot, because, again, they may be pushed into the idea of drafting a more mature guy. And if you look at what they've done in the second round in previous years with Malcolm Brogdon, who was an older player and could actually contribute straight away. And even Jordan Wara was an older player. Now, he hasn't played a lot of minutes, but he was older. Sam Merrill was an older player who they tried to give some minutes as a rookie. It didn't quite work out. So history tells you that, to me, when I look at why they've drafted those guys, it's because they've been thinking, gee, we're in a bit of a hole here. We've missed on a bunch of first-round picks. Let's get someone that we think can potentially contribute straight away, because certainly moving forward, we're going to be pushed up against the luxury tax and all these different things. So, pick 24 is a little bit earlier than those second-round older players that they've taken in the past, but it wouldn't surprise me if they went down that route again just because of where they're at.
Yeah, and again, like we said, I mean, it really depends on who is there, and if you think it's somebody that they can give us some help this year, but we really think this is going to be a big piece that we can develop for the years to come. But the tricky part is just the way that their future looks with the rest of the picks the next couple of years, what through 2027 that they owe to the Pelicans or have pick swaps coming up. This is the one year where you could do something and kind of blur the lines when you make the pick and then trade it afterwards. So that's the value is targeting a partner and saying, look, we have these contracts that we can combine to get close to $15 million. If you look at the obvious contracts, and then here's this first round pick that will add some money to the deal for any incoming player as well. But you get to make this pick that's really the best assets they have. So if you're looking outside of veteran minimum guys and what they decide to do, if they do decide to use the taxpayer, mid-level exception, that's it. So they're in a pretty precarious spot here. And even, the second round picks that they have, they've accumulated some here in the trade that they made for Serge Ibaka. And it seems like that's what they've done through the years is second round picks. But as we've said, they went from a team that I think did pretty well with their second round picks in around the early 2010s to mid 2010s to becoming a team that just utilizes that as kind of your war chest to trade for assets at the trade deadline. So it's not that the cupboard is bare because you have Giannis and Chris and Drew, but in terms of future assets, you're reaching into the cupboard and saying, man, there's not a whole lot in here.
All right, so I mentioned we were going to talk about John Horst, but as usual, we just continue to ramble on. So we might push that one back to tomorrow. I've got another trade that I think that most people might be interested in, and that's trading your usual chain auto parts store for our friends over at rockauto.com. They've been sponsoring us for a long, long time, and you can save time and money when using Rock Auto. And why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? When you can go straight to Rock Auto, which is a family business, and it's served do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. The prices are reliably low for every customer, whether you're an expert, whether you're... and by the way, it's supposed to be like storming right now, and the sun's coming out, and I can barely even see straight at the moment. But anyway, Rock Auto has everything you could need from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find out the solution for your auto parts needs. All you have to do is go to rockauto.com and see all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? That's amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So one thing that's interesting that you brought up, Justin, which is this is moving ahead a few years here, but the Pelicans, it will be fascinating to see, how these pick swaps end up. But I do think certainly over the last month, there has been a little bit of a change into how, I guess, people view the Pelicans with Brandon Ingram, and who knows what happens with Zion Williamson in that situation there. But Herb Jones and CJ McCollum, they aren't a team that looks like they're willing to spend too much more time in the lottery. Let's say that. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out moving forward. When you do pick swaps so far in advance, it's always can be a little bit dangerous, particularly when you consider at the time, I think the thing that most people were afraid of was the fact that Giannis hadn't signed that extension yet. So there was a potential for this to be absolutely disastrous. But once he signed there, you figured that maybe it was going to work out for the better. But the Pelicans themselves look like a team that is going to at least position themselves to be competitive moving forward.
Yeah, so it's 2024 and 26 are the pick swap years with the Pelicans. And then I think what everybody would point to right now is the two outrights that you owe them are 25 and 27. And of course, 27 as of right now is the first year without Giannis under contract. So you kind of knew what you were getting into. But again, it's a much easier pill to swallow when you win a championship. But it is interesting that it's gone so quickly for New Orleans to get back into the playoffs. Granted, it's an 8 seed, but it looks like they have something promising there. And we've seen the Western Conference. Granted, there was some key injuries this year, but the Western Conference has looked, I'm not going to say like the Eastern Conference in years past, but that East, the top of the East seems like it's the top and the midpoint are much more stable than what we've seen from the Western Conference. So who knows? New Orleans could be an 8 seed for the next few years. They could be better than that with Zion Williamson on the floor. And you raise the point where you get to the point potentially in 24 and 26 where maybe New Orleans is already with a worse pick than the Bucks in terms of the pick swap. So that's going to be interesting moving forward. But man, when you just look at what they have here, next year's first round they owe to Houston. 2024, they can swap with New Orleans, or New Orleans can swap with them. 25, New Orleans gets. 26 is another swap. 27, New Orleans gets. So when you look at the future, that's why I really don't know what to expect with the draft here, in that, like we just went through the scenarios, it would make sense to package some of the contracts you have with this pick to try and bring in an asset. But we just went through the years. 23, 25, and 27 are all gone. 24 and 26 may end up being worse than what you imagined with the pick swap. So part of you thinks, you know what, we kind of got to get somebody here that can stick and give us something to build on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the Bucks are now following the path that the Cavs have done in the past with LeBron James and all these teams that have contenders. That's why the one team that I did mention on yesterday's podcast was Golden State, who is just continuously being able to hit on draft picks. And that's how you can have an 8-year run where you're continuously a contender, when you continue to pick up these guys that can contribute year after year after year, which the Bucks clearly have not been able to do to this point anyway, which is why the Warriors, 9 years after they started winning games, are still there in the finals and look like they're going to be a contender for a couple more to come for sure.
Also helps to get a high lottery pick back in exchange in a trade with the D'Angelo Russell deal. But yeah, I mean, the Warriors have certainly maximized their draft picks. When you look at the way that the Bucks were built versus the Warriors, the Bucks built their team, but the Warriors, I mean, Klay Thompson was a draft pick that worked out. Steph Curry, a draft pick that worked out. Draymond Green, same thing. And you go on down the line. It'll be interesting to see what happens with guys like Kuminga and everybody else that they've had in the last, 2 to 3 drafts that they've done. They have been one of those teams that has drafted guys and developed them. And as we said at the top, you look at the Raptors, and not even draft-wise, but just what the Heat have done, and that's what stands out to you, is teams like Miami and Toronto that can find these guys that are in the G League or undrafted or second-round picks and just find something in their game that they know this translates at the pro level. Let's cultivate this and develop this, and that's something the Bucks really got to pick up now, being in the financial spot that they're in.
And just one last point on the Pelicans when we talk about that. I mean, this was kind of something I discussed with the guys with Locked On Lakers when it came to the Anthony Davis trade. I said, look, people will always want to look at that and say, well, it was a mistake, it was this, it was whatever. The Lakers won a title. The Bucks won a title with Drew Holiday. And yes, everyone understood at the time. They looked at it and said, gee, that is a lot of stuff there for a guy that is top 20 player, top 25 player, but not an out-and-out superstar. What I would actually argue, I mean, I know there was more players involved, but the package for Anthony Davis at the time, you thought that you were trading for a guy that was going to be a lock to be a top 5 player for the years. That wasn't really the case with Drew. It was just like, can we get something a little bit more than what we've been getting from Eric Bledsoe? So, ultimately, we'll see how it pans out over the next 4 or 5 seasons, but you already got the reward, and then he signed the extension, which was obviously up in the air as well. Drew Holiday, that is. So it's a tick. It's a tick for that trade. There's no doubt about that. Make sure you check out the Locked On NBA podcast. I'm sure they'll be starting to get into NBA Finals chat over the next couple of days. So if you want something just to chuck on after you're done with Locked On Bucks and listen to what people are saying about that series, then go check out the Locked On NBA podcast, Justin, and we'll just keep rolling here with the off-season content. We'll get Frankie Boy back on here sometime soon.
Yeah, we got a long off season, and we were talking about that before we started recording. Oh man, that's right. This is what a normal off season is like. We still got
tough times,
3 to 4 more months of this.
Which reminds me, we share this stream service with a couple of the other fine podcasts on the network, including Locked On Pistons. And shout out to Ku Khalil, who, by the way, has already been in off-season mode for, you could argue, actually all season. So hopefully he's doing well. But he's about to jump in and podcast here. I don't know. Maybe I need to have a conversation with him around creating off-season content. But we better wrap it up there and let him in. We'll be back tomorrow and through the rest of the week. I'm working on some guests and also the mailbag. Get those questions in, and we'll start to roll through those as well. But for Justin and myself, we'll leave it there. We'll catch you guys tomorrow.